Rick never saw it coming. His world flipped upside down, and he still couldn't quite wrap his head around it. He was 39, a hard-working guy who'd been married to Jessica, 35, for 5 years. They had a bright-eyed 4-year-old daughter, Olivia, who lit up Rick's long days. Jessica brought 2 kids from her previous marriage into the mix, 13-year-old twins, Dylan and Haley. They were good kids, even with their teenage mood swings and a bit of baggage from their rocky past. Rick loved them like they were his own, no question about it. He worked grueling hours, 10, sometimes 12-hour shifts at a job an hour's drive from home. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. The family lived in a beautiful house, never went hungry, and Jessica got to live her dream as a stay-at-home wife. She'd cook these amazing dinners every night. Think creamy mashed potatoes, perfectly seasoned chicken, and keep the place spotless. Olivia would toddle around giggling, while Jessica called her my sweetie and scooped her up for hugs. Rick thought he had it made. But about 2 months ago, something shifted. It started at the mechanic shop. They'd taken Jessica's car in for a tune-up, and that's where they met Tyler, a scruffy 23-year-old with a laid-back grin and grease-stained hands. Jessica kept talking to him, laughing a little too loud, her eyes lingering. Rick noticed, but he brushed it off. Then Tyler spotted Rick's Raiders jersey. "Dude, big fan here too," he said, and they ended up chatting football for a bit. Rick figured it was harmless. He couldn't have been more wrong. Jessica started acting off after that. She'd been so warm before, always fussing over the kids, making sure Rick had a plate ready when he dragged himself home exhausted. But the last couple months, she got quiet, withdrawn. Rick asked her once, "Hey, everything okay?" She just shrugged, mumbled something about being tired, and turned away. He figured maybe she was worried about money or the kids. Turns out she'd been sneaking off to see Tyler every day while Rick was at work, building a whole secret life behind his back. Then 3 weeks ago, Rick walked into an empty house. His phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "I'm gone. I'm in love with Tyler. He's my soulmate. Don't try to find me." She'd taken Dylan and Haley, packed some stuff, and left Olivia behind without a word. Blocked him on everything, phone, Facebook. Rick stood there in the kitchen, staring at the screen, his heart pounding in his chest. "Soulmate?" he muttered to himself. "What the heck is happening?" He did some digging. Tyler? No steady job, no apartment, nothing. Now Jessica, Tyler, and the twins were crashing in the car Rick paid for, hopping from one park to another like nomads. Family members started sending him screenshots of Jessica's posts online. "So happy now with my sexy man," she'd write, posing with Tyler in blurry selfies. It hit Rick like a punch to the gut. He couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Olivia would cry herself to sleep every night asking, "Where's Mommy?" Rick didn't have an answer. Thank goodness for his mom, Mary, and his sister, Caitlin. They stepped in big time, watching Olivia while Rick worked those long shifts, keeping her full-time on weekends so he could breathe. But even with their help, Rick felt like he was drowning. "I loved her," he thought, staring at the ceiling at night. "I took care of her, the kids, everything. Was it because I worked too much?" Jessica had complained about that before, how he was never around. "Well, sorry," he'd snapped once. "Someone's got to keep the lights on." The chaos didn't let up. One night, Rick was jolted awake by loud banging on his front door. He stumbled out of bed, heart racing, and peeked through the blinds. Cops. And there, standing with them, was Jessica, arms crossed, looking impatient. He opened the door, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice rough. "I need my stuff," Jessica said flatly, brushing past him like she still owned the place. The cops explained they were just there to keep the peace while she grabbed what she wanted. Olivia was asleep upstairs. Thank God she didn't have to see this. Jessica rummaged through closets, tossing clothes into a bag. "Toss the rest," she said over her shoulder. "I'm never coming back." Rick's jaw tightened. He stepped outside for a second and saw Tyler slouched in the passenger seat of the car, his car, scrolling on his phone like nothing was wrong. Rick's hands balled into fists, but he kept his cool. No point in making a scene with the cops right there. She left, tires squealing as they peeled out. Rick shut the door, leaning against it, trying to process what just happened. Then the next morning his phone lit up with a text from her. "Hey, got any gas money? Will you pay the car note? Maybe I'll meet you face to face if you do. Just saying." Rick stared at it, incredulous. Was she serious? After all this? He didn't respond. He was done being her ATM. Sitting on the couch that night, Rick's mind wandered back to how they'd met. 5 years ago, at a buddy's party. He'd had too many beers, passed out, and woke up with Jessica curled up next to him, fully clothed, just holding on to him like they'd known each other forever. She'd been homeless back then, living in her car with Dylan and Haley scraping by. Rick didn't know her, but she stuck to him from that day on. She was stunning, long hair, big smile, this wild energy that pulled him in. He thought he'd hit the jackpot. Man, was I blind, he muttered to himself now, shaking his head. The red flags were there. He just didn't want to see them. Before Tyler came along, Jessica had been great, or so Rick thought. She'd whip up these incredible meals, like her lasagna that Dylan and Haley would fight over, and fuss over Olivia like the perfect mom. "My baby," she'd coo, planting kisses on her cheeks. But when she got mad about Rick's hours, she'd clam up instead of talking. I was tired too, Rick thought. 10-hour days, an hour each way. Yeah, I couldn't take her to the movies or some fancy dinner every night. But we had a good life. Why didn't she just say something? The worst part? She hadn't asked about Olivia once since she left. Not a single, "How's my sweetie doing?" 3 weeks, and nothing. Rick couldn't fathom it. The Jessica he knew, or thought he knew, would have been calling every day, worried sick. Now, she was ice cold like a stranger. It messed with his head big time. Dylan and Haley were caught in the middle of it all, and that tore Rick apart. Those twins had been through enough, bounced around with Jessica before he came into the picture. With Rick, they'd finally settled into something stable. A nice house, good schools, a routine. They weren't perfect. Dylan had a temper, Haley could be sassy, but they were good kids. Rick had been dad to them for 5 years, and he'd do anything for them. Now Jessica had ripped them out of that safety net, dragging them into her mess with Tyler. Rick pieced together what he could about Jessica's new life. From what her sister Madison told him, they were hopping between parks, sleeping in the car with all their stuff piled in the back. Sometimes they'd crash at a cheap motel. Rick figured Tyler scraped up the cash for that, but mostly it was the car. His car, the one he was still paying off. He'd shut down the debit card after Jessica left, reporting it stolen when he realized she was draining the account. She had no money of her own. She'd never worked a day since he'd known her. Stay-at-home wife was her thing, but she'd complain about being bored, unfulfilled. Get a part-time job, Rick had suggested once. She'd scoffed, like it was beneath her. Nothing he did was ever enough. Then there was her past. She'd told Rick her ex-husband was a monster, beat her, abandoned her and the twins. Rick bought it hook, line, and sinker. He'd never met the guy, and the twins didn't talk about him much. Now, Rick wondered, was it true, or just another layer of Jessica's stories? He didn't know what to believe anymore. One thing he did know, Jessica had a certain relaxation habit. Big clouds of it filling the house. Rick hated it, didn't touch the stuff himself. They'd argue, especially when she'd indulge in her little habit around Olivia. Once, he caught her doing it while on FaceTime with him at work, Olivia toddling around in the background. He'd lost it, yelling through the phone, "Are you kidding me right now?" She toned it down after that, at least when he was home. The last 6 months he hadn't seen her touch it. Now? From the pics she posted online, her and Tyler were all about it, grinning through the haze like it was their whole vibe. The kids started school a few weeks back, but Rick wasn't sure they were still going. Their backpacks and clothes were still in their rooms. He'd checked. Jessica came by with the cops that one night to grab more stuff, but it was all her own clothes, nothing for Dylan or Haley. Rick's stomach twisted thinking about them out there, missing classes, sleeping in random parks. He decided enough was enough. He called CPS, left a voicemail laying it all out. I can't keep waiting for her to figure this out, he told himself. Those kids deserve better. That stung. Rick had been dad to those kids for 5 years, helped with homework, cheered at their soccer games. What about Olivia? He asked, voice tight. You've got another kid, remember? Jessica's face softened for a second. Yeah, I love her. I miss her. But right now, I can't be in her life. She's better off with you. Rick blinked, stunned. You're just walking away from her? Jessica shrugged, like it was no big deal. Respect my choice, Rick. Get over it. He pressed her. Are you really in love with that guy? She nodded, no hesitation. Yes, he's the one. I don't want to talk about it. Rick took a deep breath. Fine. I want a divorce. Jessica's eyes narrowed. No, I'm not discussing that either. Then, casual as ever, she added, Oh, and the car note's due Friday. You're paying it, right? And my phone bill. Rick almost laughed. Nope, not happening. The car's in my name. Figure it out. She smirked. Tyler's got my phone covered, but you'll pay the car. It's mine. Rick shook his head. We'll see about that. Tomorrow was his birthday, and he'd planned a steakhouse dinner with Olivia, Mary, and Caitlin. Can I take the twins too? He'd asked. Absolutely not, Jessica snapped, then got prickly when he asked why they were sleeping in parks. Mind your own business, she huffed, and stormed off with Tyler and the kids. Rick drove home, hands shaking on the wheel. He'd called CPS that day, left another voicemail. This wasn't over. Rick's birthday came and went, a quiet night at the steakhouse with Olivia chattering about her mashed potatoes and Mary giving him that warm, "You're doing okay, son," look. But the drama didn't take a holiday. That evening his phone rang, Jessica's number. He almost didn't answer, but then Dylan's voice came through. Hey, Dad. Rick, happy birthday? Rick's heart lifted a little. Thanks, bud. Where are you? Dylan hesitated. We're at Tyler's mom's house tonight, sleeping in one room. Rick's grip tightened on the phone. You okay there? Dylan mumbled, Yeah, and hung up quick. Rick paced the living room after that, Olivia asleep upstairs. Tyler's mom's house? One room? He wanted to storm over there, scoop up the twins, but he didn't even know where there was. He called CPS again the next day, set up an in-person meeting. Work gave him 2 weeks off to deal with everything. Olivia needed him, and he needed to get his head straight. I'm so drained, he admitted to Caitlin over coffee. Every time I think I'm moving forward, she pulls me back in. Then Jessica showed up again. Friday night she rolled into the driveway, demanding car payment money. Rick met her at the door, arms crossed. I'm not paying it, he said. She switched gears fast. Okay, fine. Can we talk about me coming back? Rick stared at her dumbfounded. No, I don't want you here. Please, leave. She didn't budge. Walked right in with Dylan and Haley trailing behind her. Olivia was at Mary's for the weekend, thank goodness. Rick grabbed his phone, dialed 911, explained the situation. My estranged wife's in my house, won't leave. She took off with the kids weeks ago. Now she's back demanding stuff. 10 minutes later, 2 officers were at the door. Rick laid it out, her leaving with Tyler, the car, the kids living in parks. Jessica played it cool. It's my place too, I just want to talk. The cops weren't buying it. Ma'am, you need to go, one said. She glared at Rick. Fine, I'm filing for divorce Monday. Rick shrugged. Good, my lawyer's already on it. She stormed out, the twins following reluctantly. As she pulled away, Rick spotted a van idling at the end of the driveway, Tyler behind the wheel, waiting. He shook his head. Typical. A couple days later, his phone pinged. Message from Jessica. Can you pay for medicine? The kids are sick. Cold or flu, I think. Rick stared at the text, torn. She meant Dylan and Haley, he knew that much. They were still out there with her. Olivia was safe at home, tucked in after her weekend at Mary's, but the twins? He couldn't just ignore them. He typed back, They okay? A minute later his phone rang. Jessica's number. He picked up and her voice came through, tired and clipped. "They're coughing. Noses all stuffed up. I don't have cash for meds." Rick's heart sank. Those kids didn't deserve this. "Fine," he said. "Meet me at CVS in 20. He grabbed his keys, told Caitlin over the phone he'd be quick. She was crashing at his place to watch Olivia, and headed out. At the store, Jessica was alone this time, no Tyler in sight. She stood by the entrance, arms crossed, looking worn out but cleaner than last time. Jeans, a hoodie, hair pulled back. "Where are the twins?" Rick asked. "In the car," she said, nodding toward the parking lot. He bought cold medicine, some soup cans, and a couple granola bars for Dylan and Haley. "This is for them," he said, handing her the bag. "Not you? Not him." Jessica took it, muttering a quiet, "Thanks." She lingered, shifting her weight. "Can we talk?" Rick shook his head. "No, I've got nothing to say." He turned to leave, but she called after him. "They miss you, you know." He paused, didn't look back, then kept walking to his truck. Rick spent the next few days buried in paperwork and phone calls. He'd finally connected with a lawyer, a sharp guy named Tom who promised to get the divorce rolling, car or no car. Rick also had an appointment with Child Protective Services lined up, ready to spill everything about Jessica, Tyler, and the twins' unstable situation. He was determined to protect Dylan, Haley, and Olivia, no matter what it took. "I'm not letting her keep dragging them through this," he told Caitlin over breakfast one morning, sipping coffee while Olivia munched on cereal. Caitlin nodded. "You're doing the right thing, Rick." That afternoon, Rick pulled into his driveway after a long meeting with CPS. His heart stopped. There was Dylan, hunched by the front door, a backpack slung over one shoulder. The kid looked worn out, his dark hair messy, clothes rumpled like he'd been running. Rick jumped out of the truck. "Dylan, what are you doing here?" Dylan looked up, eyes red. "I couldn't stay with her anymore, Dad. I ran off. Been waiting for you." Rick didn't hesitate. "Come on. Get inside." He ushered Dylan in, shutting the door behind them. The house was quiet. Olivia was at preschool, and Caitlin had gone back to her place. Rick led Dylan to the kitchen, pulling out a chair. "You hungry?" Dylan nodded, and Rick threw together a quick meal, grilled cheese sandwich, a glass of milk, some apple slices. As Dylan ate, Rick sat across from him, watching the boy scarf it down like he hadn't seen food in days. "You're safe here," Rick said, voice steady. "I've got you, okay? I'll protect you." Dylan swallowed, then looked up, his voice shaky. "Thanks, Dad, but I'm worried about Haley. She's still with Mom, and it's bad." Rick's stomach tightened. "What do you mean, bad?" Dylan shrugged, picking at the sandwich crust. "Mom's been all over the place, yelling one minute, crying the next. Tyler's there sometimes, then he's not. Haley said she couldn't take it anymore either, but I don't know where she went after I left." Rick grabbed his phone, adrenaline kicking in. He dialed Jessica's number, pacing the kitchen. It rang twice before she picked up, her voice sharp and jittery. "What, Rick? What do you want?" He kept his tone calm, though his pulse was racing. "Dylan's here with me. He ran away. Where's Haley?" Jessica snapped back. "What? He ran away? That little... I don't know. Haley's fine. She's with me." But her words were slurring together, frantic, like she couldn't keep her thoughts straight. "Jessica, slow down," Rick said. "Is Haley there right now? Put her on." There was a long pause, some muffled noise in the background. Maybe Tyler's voice, maybe the car radio. She's around," Jessica finally mumbled. "I don't know, Rick, okay? I'm dealing with a lot." She sounded off, not making sense, and then the line went dead. Rick stared at the phone, dread creeping up his spine. "She doesn't even know where Haley is," he said aloud, turning to Dylan. The boy's eyes widened. "She ran too, didn't she?" Rick didn't waste time. He called the local police, explaining everything. "My stepdaughter's missing. Her mom's not coherent, and her brother says she ran off. They've been living in a car with some guy. Parks, motels, you name it. I need help finding her." The dispatcher took the details. Jessica's car description, Tyler's name, the twins' usual hangouts like the school and nearby parks. We'll send a unit, they promised. Rick hung up, then looked at Dylan. Stay here, bud. Lock the door. I'm going with them. The police met Rick a few blocks from the house, and they started searching. Rick rode along, pointing out spots he knew Jessica frequented. Parks with overlooks, the gas station, anywhere she might have parked. An hour in, one officer radioed, "Got a girl matching the description under the bridge off Maple Street." Rick's heart leapt. They pulled up to the spot, a quiet, wooded area where the bridge arched over a dry creek. There was Haley, curled up against a concrete pillar, her hoodie pulled tight around her. She looked lost, shivering, her face streaked with dirt. "Haley!" Rick called, jumping out. She looked up, startled, then ran to him, throwing her arms around his waist. "I didn't know where to go," she sobbed. "I got away from Mom, but then I got turned around." Rick hugged her tight, relief washing over him. "You're okay now. I've got you." The officers asked a few questions. Haley said she'd bolted that morning after a fight with Jessica, wandered off, and ended up here. They took her statement, then drove her and Rick back home. That night, with Dylan and Haley safe inside eating leftovers and watching TV with Olivia, Rick sat down at the kitchen table. He pulled out a notepad and started writing. A formal statement for the police and CPS. "Jessica's unfit," he wrote. "She's unstable, can't keep track of the kids, and they're running away from her. I want her parental rights revoked. I'll take custody. Dylan, Haley, Olivia, all of them." He was ready to fight for it. The twins were back under his roof, and he'd be darned if he'd let Jessica rip them away again. CPS had his back. He'd meet with them tomorrow. For the first time in weeks, Rick felt a spark of control. "This is my family now," he thought. "I'm not letting go." With Dylan and Haley safe at home, Rick didn't waste a second pushing forward. The police were already on Jessica's trail. His statement about her instability, the kids running away, and her erratic behavior gave them plenty to work with. CPS was in the loop too, building a case to strip her parental rights. Rick wasn't messing around anymore. "She's had enough chances," he told his lawyer Tom over the phone. "I'm done waiting for her to figure it out." It didn't take long for things to come to a head. A couple days later, September 15th, Rick got a call from the police. Jessica had been tracked down, not because of some big manhunt, but because she'd crashed the car. She'd been trying to hightail it out of town, heading for who knows where, when she veered off the road and slammed into a guardrail. The officer on the phone said she'd been out of it, not in her right mind, clearly impaired. Rick didn't ask for details. He didn't need to. Miraculously, she'd walked away with just a few scratches and a broken arm. The car, his car, was totaled, but Jessica, still kicking. Rick hung up, sank onto the couch and whispered, "Thank you, God." Not for her, he wasn't that generous, but for the kids. Dylan and Haley were upstairs, arguing over a video game with Olivia giggling beside them, safe under his roof. If they'd been in that car. He shook his head, pushing the thought away. Later that night, alone in the kitchen, he stared at his coffee mug, guilt creeping in. "I should have acted sooner," he muttered. "Why'd I drag my feet so long? I knew the twins weren't okay out there." He doubted himself, hesitated, thinking maybe Jessica would pull it together. That was on him, and it gnawed at him. The courts moved fast after that. With Jessica's crash, her condition at the scene, and the kids' statements about running away, the case was airtight. Rick sat through hearings, flanked by Caitlin and Mary, who squeezed his hand when the judge banged the gavel. Full custody, Dylan, Haley, and Olivia were his, legally and forever. Jessica didn't fight it much. She couldn't, really. She got slapped with a short jail sentence, a few months, for the crash and her reckless state. Rick didn't celebrate. He just felt relieved. It was over. Life started to settle after that. Rick threw himself into helping Dylan, Haley, and Olivia heal. Dylan opened up more, talking about school and soccer again. Haley saw a counselor to sort through her rough patches, slowly smiling more. Olivia still asked about Mommy sometimes, but she'd cuddle up with Rick on the couch, content with her little world of 3. Mary cooked big Sunday dinners, roast chicken and all the fixings, while Caitlin dragged the kids to the park to burn off energy. Rick's buddies from work stopped by too, cracking beers and telling him, "You're a heck of a dad, man." It meant the world. Then, something unexpected happened. Rick met Linda. She was a co-worker's friend, 38, warm brown eyes, a laugh that filled the room. They crossed paths at a barbecue Caitlin hosted, and Linda ended up chatting with Rick while flipping burgers. She was easy to talk to, grounded in a way Jessica never was. The kids took to her fast. Olivia tugged her hand to show off her dolls. Dylan asked her to referee a game with Haley, and she jumped right in, no hesitation. "She's great with them," Rick told Mary later, a small grin tugging at his lips. Things blossomed from there. Linda started coming around more, helping Rick with school pickups when his shifts ran late, cooking spaghetti with the kids on Friday nights. She didn't try to replace Jessica. She just fit, like a missing piece they didn't know they needed. One evening, as Linda read Olivia a bedtime story while Dylan and Haley sprawled out with homework, Rick watched from the doorway. His chest felt light, full. "This is it," he thought. "We're happy." By later, Rick and Linda were a couple, quietly official, no rush, just right. The kids adored her, calling her Lynn and begging her to stay for movie nights. She'd step in like a mom without forcing it, packing lunches, braiding Haley's hair, cheering at Dylan's games. Rick caught himself smiling more, the weight of the past lifting. Jessica was a distant memory, a chapter closed. He had his kids, his family, his Linda. Life was good again, messy, loud, and good. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to the channel. I wish you a great mood and good luck.